Hey, did you know that Berserk has a game? Hack and slash, skeletons, ghosts, apostles, elven dust, cannon arms, crossbows, hell, even Skull Knight. For a little bit. It's a 20-plus-year-old game, sure, and it looks like it. Hell, it plays like it. But considering how large the Berserk community has grown since the game released, I feel like it's about time I covered Sword of the Berserk, Guts Rage, for the Sega Dreamcast. What's first worth noting is the music is composed by Susumu Hirasawa, the artist behind the 1997 anime's iconic OST, and the movie, plus the recent anime's insert songs, which are all timeless classics. This game's soundtrack literally contains some of the best Berserk OSTs in the whole franchise, and I regularly use them for some of my Berserk videos. It's a Dreamcast game, which is a console that failed pretty quickly due to the fact that the PS1 released and swept the floor. That's a shame, because the Dreamcast is host to some really good games, and some really cool and innovative features that hadn't been done before, and was never done since, not least of which being the usage of QuickTime events, like in Berserk, but also the smaller details like the fact that the memory card has its own screen. When you play a game, the screen will show you different things. For example, playing Berserk will make the card play some neat pixel animations of Puck, and also record your points. When I first heard of this game, nobody seemed to cover this, so it really blew my mind if I'm being honest. Another thing though, was the addition of a mini-game centered around Puck. It's so cool and random and unmentioned in every review that I saw. I love it. The music gets irritating and the game gets old, but man, it's great to find bonus content whilst we're living in a time where this would be charged as DLC and stuff. With a story written and designed by Kentaro Miura, it technically fulfills the criteria to be considered canon. Furthermore, the story neatly fits in between Volume 21 and 22, squarely between the ending of the Conviction arc and the beginning of the Hawk of the Millennium Empire. So, if you don't know what happens, let me run you through this brief period of Guts' life. Guts and Casca have just been reunited and escaped from the Tower of Conviction together, when they come across a troupe of performers led by a young girl who are being attacked by bandits. Guts kills the bandits before they ever get to raise a finger against the girl, whom, after thanking him, names herself as Rita, and invites them to watch her perform in the town just ahead. They quickly depart, and Guts is hesitant, but after feeling an evil presence in his brand, he decides to go to the town anyway, with a suspicion against one of Rita's mysterious performers. When arriving at the town, they see the performance in full swing, but Rita's performer loses his mask, revealing a horrible disfigurement which the citizens quickly identify as a Mandragoran possession, which they attack and antagonize him for. This Mandragoran possession has changed the performer into a massively strong creature who Guts is forced to deal with. Rita naturally hates Guts for this, but after all, he was only a monster, or so it would seem. The mayor appears and thanks Guts, asking for him to visit the castle for further discussions. In the castle, the mayor wants to talk to Guts alone, leaving Casca and Puck to wander the castle grounds. The mayor, who happens to be called Balzac, asks Guts if he can help defeat the Mandragora, which has been infecting and possessing countless denizens of the town. Guts is hesitant to agree, but when he learns that there is a Mandragoran heart, which could possibly cure the denizens, restore their minds, and potentially even cure Casca, he begrudgingly accepts. Apparently the mayor took a piece of the heart already, but it was not enough, and the rest, located on a Mandragora tree, is needed to work on a cure. Meanwhile, Casca finds a strange picture of a beautiful princess, whom is mysteriously absent. They then witness Rita being hounded by guards when a sudden revolt by the townsfolk interrupts and saves her. Guts, hearing all of this, runs to the scene and finds out from Puck that Casca was kidnapped. Fighting through the night, he manages to find out that the rebels were the ones to kidnap Casca, but only to recruit him against Balzac, who Guts learns is apparently a tyrant, experimenting and sacrificing his people in order to create an army of Mandragoran super soldiers. He tells the rebel that he is still going to carry out Balzac's plan concerning the Mandragoran heart. The rebel is dismayed by this, but when Rita is sat there mourning for her performer, the only person in her life who accepted her and shared a life with her, Guts sympathizes with her, and the rebel is reconciled with this realization that more bloodshed shouldn't be the priority, but a cure. Guts goes onwards, towards the Mandragoran heart. Everyone in the resistance dies, whilst Casca, left behind, is intercepted by none other than Nosferatu Zod. Guts is told this by Rita when he defeats a bunch of Mandragorans, the infection clearly defeating the villagers. He meets a nun who talks about a boy called Nico, a bullied boy who always smiled despite all life's misfortunes, through famine, bullying, and strife. He died in the snow, outside a church, begging for sanctuary, a Behelit in hand. The nun argues for the Mandragorans, for protecting their roots, blames Balzac for his hatefulness, and begs them for their mercy before disappearing altogether. When Guts catches up to her in a whole undergrowth of Mandragoran civilization, she is revealed to be under their spell, with this boss lying right behind her. Yep, it's a heavily transformed Nico. Guts kills Nico because, well, that's Guts' morality. The nun takes Nico's corpse and runs away. Guts pursues, meeting with Rita again, and they finally manage to catch up to the nun, who is pursued by Balzac's men. With nowhere left to turn, she willingly runs into the flames, cursing the state of the world for her torments. Rita bursts into tears, whilst Guts remains silent. Balzac's men, however, do not remain silent. They thank Guts for allowing the nun's sting operation, and then assert Guts as a threat to the well-being of the community altogether, crossbows in hand. Then Zod joins the frickin' fight, and Balzac's men get shredded to, well, shreds. Zod talks about fighting Guts. Guts asks about Griffith, about if he's making an army, which he's absolutely correct about too. And then they fight. It's a tie, but then again, what else can it be since this is a midquel? However, Zod tells Guts that there are things that they both need to do now, announcing a stalemate. Guts meets up with Casca, Rita and Puck, as it's revealed that the mayor only managed to restore his wife's affliction at the cost of her consciousness. She appears to the crew, muttering and dissonant, just like Casca. Balzac's frustrations overcome him as he fights Guts. I will say, the way in which Miura went about making Balzac a full-on villain is extremely well done in the time that the game takes up. It follows his style and writing extremely well, and if you compare that with, let's say, Ganishka's single chapter of backstory or Mozgus' origins, it's surprisingly well fleshed out in comparison. Balzac is defeated, a proud man who stuck by his ideals to the very end. But wait, that's not over yet. Guts, Puck and Rita go on, looking for Casca when all of a sudden a Mandragoran, Lovecraftian monster starts destroying everything around them. Guts, forever the struggler, runs to the source of the massive vine creature in a Crash Bandicoot-esque runaway level, where he makes it to the end, finds the source of the Mandragora, defeats it, and saves Casca. Unfortunately, the Mandragoran heart only restores Casca's sanity for a few seconds. He gets just a few moments with her, but they unfortunately amount to nothing. Back at the main palace, Rita's necklace falls, revealing itself to be a Bahamut, right as Balzac's blood touches the ground. With everyone saved, Guts goes back to the palace to find the princess, yet instead, he finds that the mayor made a further sacrifice, this time with the Zegodhand, to become an apostle. Guts fights and wins against him, and then leaves the town for good, with Rita also going her separate way. Then, in an after-credit sequence, Skull Knight comes and grabs the Bahamut, and then off he goes again, as the timeline matches right up to what would then be the beginning of the Millennium Falcon arc. Overall, a good game, a solid story through and through. It's cool that this isn't just filler, that it actually expands and helps the future plausibility of the story. It kind of makes Guts' later acceptance of a group more plausible. Instead of going through one moment of teamwork and then realizing that Casca needs to be looked after, here we see Guts try his hardest to look after Casca, and he doesn't succeed. He's always worried and on edge, constantly being separated from her in-game. Guts' ideology of dependence is growing at this point in the story, and this is true of the game as well. This is the last point of Guts' life in the story of Berserk, where he is alone, as Farnese, Serpico and Isidro are yet to catch up with him. To see this canon acceptance from Guts is really awesome. It's like reading between the lines of where he was at after finding Casca. Whilst the game has that 90s cheese and edginess that comes with the territory, it's really nice to see that the game gives enough time to flesh out these humanizing moments a little, as it's this that makes Berserk, Berserk. If you need any proof of this game's canonicity, then look no further than the release date. This game came out on the 16th of December 1999, making its release occur at the same time that Volume 19's content was being released in Young Animal magazine. That means this game, whilst taking place after the Conviction arc, was released before it ended. You might think, what does that even mean? Well, when Nosferatu Zod shows up, he mentions Griffith's rebirth. Griffith's rebirth happens in Volume 21, meaning the game actually gave away and spoiled something yet to happen in the manga. That's insane. It's also why Femto isn't in the sacrificial ceremony, because he's now in his physical form. Speaking of predated, this was released locally in the West with a dub of its own, and this dub was undertaken and released in 2000, meaning this dub predates the 90s anime dub which came out in 2005, making this the very first English-speaking Guts. Not everything is good, mind you. There are some big downsides to this game that I would recommend not playing it for. The game is, for one, really hard. For example, you get to swing the Dragon Slayer, but they put you in so many tight corners where you have to resort to other things. And because it's a hack and slash, there are enemies everywhere, constantly spawning, and all of this happens as you have to navigate a semi-maze of a level design. When you have something as big as the Dragon Slayer, you want to swing it around, and so when it hits every single wall imaginable, it starts to get a little bit disappointing. That's all manageable, mind you. Like most hack and slashes, you can kind of run past a lot of this, but one of the equally difficult things about this is the fact that the game has a really, really poor save feature. You can't save whenever you want, and there is also no autosave feature. So basically, there are 3 windows of time in the game where it says, new stage. When it says this, you can continue watching the cutscene, and when the gameplay begins next, you need to bring up the pause menu, select quit game, say yes, you want to quit the game, and then and only then will it ask you if you want to save. So you click yes, and then it takes you to the menu. You can only do this at one of those 3 designated spots in the game, and if you don't save, if you carry on and die, you won't be able to load your game. It doesn't give you the chance to go back and make that save. It's something you consciously have to pull yourself out of the action in order to do. Granted, you're given some continues, but for such a difficult game, the fact that there isn't an autosave feature and that there are only 3 saves is bad enough. But the fact that you have to stop and quit the game in order for it to actually count is just unnecessarily brutal. There's this one point of the game, the biggest gap without a save, where you have to go through waves of monsters, 20 minutes of cutscenes, more monsters, a couple more minutes of cutscenes, a boss, a couple more minutes of cutscenes, Nosferatu Zod, a couple more minutes of cutscene, and then you get to save the game. And yes, Zod is the hardest boss in the entire game. So if you fail the game on him, you have to start right back at the beginning. And if you had missed the 2 saves before that, you'd have to go to the beginning of the game. In terms of gameplay, as someone who came from The Witcher 3 recently, and then played The Witcher 2 and went back, a much lesser game in many ways, this game plays like what one would expect from a Witcher 1, except this came 7 years before that. Now that's really impressive. I know it's not a full-on RPG, but the story is there. There's great potential to carry on the combat and inventory. There's great room for improvement. It wasn't a disappointment at all. Back in the day, it was more than an adept video game adaptation. And it just really stands the test of time if you go backwards with that mindset. This is the turning point of Guts. Casca is at peace but devoid of her humanity, just like the Mandragora. She could live a better life without this trauma. She's happy and peaceful, and yet Guts persists for the benefit of the few over the many. Guts goes through this selfish struggle of what's right as an almost middle point between the vengeful Black Swordsman and the caring mercenary that he'd become. It weighs and balances, and he's pushed to and fro, and it culminates in what we see in the manga, a softened, more accepting Guts. It bridges that path, and it acts as some real development for the story. Anyway, it's about 5 to 6 hours long if you blast through the whole thing at once, so that makes the saves a little bit more forgivable, but with that runtime, this arc, if you can call it that, lasts about as long in-game as the Lost Children chapter in the manga. They both have a lot of similarities actually. We have a one-off type of villain, we have incredibly similar pacing, we have Skull Knight coming in the aftermath to be the Behelit, and Rita bears a lot of similarities to Jill. And because of the runtime, we have a massively similar pacing across both. Considering this chapter of the manga is one of the most consistently praised and coveted story arcs, I think it's even crazier that this game is almost entirely forgotten, because there is no other arc or group of chapters in the rest of the manga that bears anywhere near as many similarities to it than this game. For those that would kill to watch the Lost Children arc animated, this is definitely the closest thing that you're gonna get. Anyway, here are some wonderful people. Thank you very much for supporting this video. For $1 a month, you can do the exact same to get videos early, scripts early, bonus videos early, pretty much just an early access Patreon for $1. Until next time, thanks very much for watching. Like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts down below. Have a wonderful day.